Okay, this is 5.3 Graphing Quadratic Equations. Okay, so the parent function is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And we won't worry about standard form right now, but I do want you to see the parent function of that. So let's look at the parts of the graph. This is called a parabola. And that's what happens when you have x squared x in a number. Okay, this top point, this is called the vertex. It's the turning point of the graph. This point, just like when we had the equation of a line, is the y-intercept. Also, when we have the equation of a line, we had x-intercepts. In this case, there are two. Almost always, we have two x-intercepts when we're dealing with a parabola. There are a few cases where we don't have any, and there are a few cases when you have one, but most of the time we have two. Then there is this line that runs through the vertex down the middle of this graph, the exact center. This is called the axis of symmetry, because if you folded the graph in half on that line, you would have equal parts on both sides. The axis of symmetry can be found using the equation x equals negative b over 2a. The vertex can be found when you substitute the axis of symmetry and solve for y. Because the axis of symmetry is a point x, comma y, where x is the axis of symmetry and y is what you get when you substitute that in. The x-intercept, it's really easy. The x-intercept is the c value. So usually we'll say 0, comma c, because it's when x is 0, y is c. And here's the really fun part. You already know how to do x-intercepts, which are sometimes called zeros and sometimes called roots. This is when you factor and solve. You can also use the quadratic formula. Either one of those will work. Okay, so let's practice these. For each of these, it says find the vertex, the axis of symmetry, and the y-intercept. So the vertex on this one is at 2 on the x, 3 on the y. The axis of symmetry crosses the x-axis at 2, so x equals 2. And the y-intercept, when x is 0, y is negative 1. Let's not use blue since the graph is blue. Let's use pink. All right, so let's start with the vertex. It's at 1, 3. Crosses the x-axis at 1. And the y-intercept is at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll save that last one for some practice in class. Okay, so now we're going to have some steps to graph a parabola. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to find the axis of symmetry. And remember, the axis of symmetry is x equals negative b over 2a. Now remember, a is the number before the x, a is the number before the x squared, b is the number before the x, and c is the one without an x. So x equals negative b over 2a, and a is 1, so that's negative 2 over 2. So x is negative 1. So let's come over here on our graph. Let's draw in x is negative 1 with a dotted line to show that that's our axis of symmetry. Then, to find the vertex, we're going to take that x value and we're going to substitute that in to the equation that we started with. So that means let's try that again. Negative 1 squared plus 2 times negative 1 minus 3. So that's 1 minus 2 minus 3. So y is equal to negative 4, which means our vertex on our axis of symmetry is negative 1, comma negative 4. And whoops, I only went down 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's our vertex. So that's the second piece of information that we have to graph. Now we automatically know by looking at our equation, y equals x squared plus 2x minus 3. The number that's in front of the x squared, in this case it's a positive 1. If it's positive, it's going to graph up. If that number in front of the x is negative, then it's going to graph down. So we know that this one's going to go up because it's positive. So now we want to find our zeros. We want to factor. So y equals x squared plus 2x minus 3. But instead of y, we want to have that as 0, make that a 0 because these are zeros. This is when y is 0, what is x? So using the trident method, we always want to try that to see if it'll work first. 1 times 3 is 3. Factors of 3 are 1 times 3. And if I take 3 minus 1, I get x plus 3 and x minus 1 equals 0. So set each one equal to 0 and solve. So x is negative 3 and x is 1. So now we have 2 more pieces to put on our graph. X is at 1, 2, 3, and it crosses again at positive 1. Okay, perfect. We have one more piece of information that we can get. That is our y-intercept. So when x is 0, the y-intercept becomes c. So 0, negative 3. Because the y-intercept is 0, c. So at 0, negative 3. The last step is to connect your dots. And we know that we can reflect that over the axis of symmetry. Whoops, that's ugly. Let's try that again. A little bit better. You want to try to hit the dots maybe a little bit better than I did. Because I completely missed my y-intercept there. And those are the steps to graph. So we have another one that we're going to do in class together. And then you should be ready to do this on your own.